tried to keep them from taking his power away. And I could show you a great scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi, Alec Guinness, is King Charles I before losing his head. And in a great scene with Richard Harris, who is Oliver Cromwell. And that's just a great movie, as if you get a chance to see it. Great acting. In any case, Charles II wasn't the second yet. It was a kid, and Thomas Hobbes was the one that was giving him lessons and teaching him. Even took him, I believe, to France on a trip, and they hiked around and explored things. I remember one of the things really neat was climbing up on the top of the highest peaks and finding fossils of sea life, in the rocks, and trying to figure out how the heck did they get there. And the conclusion that Hobbes made was that it was from the flood of Noah. That's what caused that. Meanwhile, in France, after Hobbes was born and he was only 8 years old, René Descartes was born, and his father was named Descartes. So it's one of those things. I don't get it, but it just so happens that he's famous for the map, Descartes, and yet his name is Descartes. It's just crazy to me, right? How that happens with so many people. But he's not a very strong boy. He's sick, ill most of the time when he's young, so he doesn't play out at recess with all the other kids. He stays inside, and they try to keep him healthy. But eventually, once he graduates from La Flèche, which was a college, a Jesuit college, where he went, he joined the army. And the army he joined was the Dutch army, and he was primarily like an engineer or an engineer student. So most of the time he was with the army, even though he was actually in the army. He was studying with Beechman. It's the same, if you grew up with the Muppets, and the two lab guys, the real tall Beekman or whatever he was, I think that's the same name as the guy that really was a mathematician that helped Descartes when he was in the Dutch army. But in any case, he learned a lot about math and so on, and finally decided that he was not going to read books and things like that anymore. Instead, he was going to let the world be his teacher. And if he couldn't see things, and understand things, how things put together, then he wouldn't believe it. One of the cardinals that he knew, and by the way, there's a neat book by A.C. Grayling, who's on my list of philosophers that you could pick. A.C. Grayling. I don't know what the name, Anthony, I don't remember what the C stands for. But in any case, he wrote a book about Descartes, which is just titled Descartes. And in that, it's a biography of Descartes. It's really well written and everything. But he also argues that Descartes, while he was in the various army, and he actually did a lot of travel in Europe at the time, was a spy for the Jesuits. So that's kind of interesting. And it ties in beautifully. And there's like a whole bunch of different intrigue and things that he was supposed to be involved with. Part of it associated with secret organizations, things of that sort. So it's kind of fascinating if you get a chance. Of course, you can't prove it, because if you were a spy, you certainly wouldn't want everybody to know it.
You weren't very good.
So that's just, kind of interesting. But at a certain point, when the one king died in France, I forget which one, but the next one came in, he wasn't as happy with the Jesuits as the previous one, and so the one cardinal said to Descartes, better get out of here, leave the areas where the Inquisition is around, right? Because they might pick on you because of your different writings and so on. So he headed to the Netherlands, and even while he was in the Netherlands, by the way, every 6 months he moved from one house to another. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the reason for that was because he was doing dissection. And if you get like a cow and you put it on your living room table and you dissect it, and this is before they had things like soap, and that kind of stuff. But if you're dissecting the animal and you've got all these parts and you're trying to figure out what these parts are doing and so on, 6 months is about as long as you could probably stand living in that room. That's just my guess, right? But so he would move about every 6 months. Part of it, what they say is, well, he didn't want anyone to find him. And there is that possibility. If you wanted to find Descartes and correspond with him, and by the way, Thomas Hobbes did meet him at least once in Paris, remember, because he was constantly going back and forth. The way you would get in contact with René Descartes was through Father Mersenne. So Father Mersenne, not famous for any special writings himself, but he's the one that kind of was the hub that pulled all these different smart people in and, set up, like luncheons and, coffees, or, well, I don't know if they had coffee, but, all that kind of thing, socials and so on, and kept all these people in touch. So Father Mersenne was really important. But Descartes, in meeting with all these mathematicians mostly, ended up becoming very famous, one of the most famous in his own day as a mathematician. We think of him as a philosopher, but in his own day he was primarily famous because he was a great mathematician. And one of the things that's kind of neat, he was lying in bed, and he always used to sleep late. He was not a morning person, so he would sleep like till noon or whatever. Remember, he was a weak kid, apparently, right? So he just stays in bed. While he was lying in bed, he saw a fly walking around on the ceiling. And it occurred to him that if he had mapped out the ceiling with a grid, our Cartesian grid, we call it, right? Where you see, like you see maps that have, lines, longitude, latitude, or X and Y axes, etc. What he thought was, if I had such a grid, I could map the route of the fly as it walked across the ceiling. So that supposedly inspired him to start using a grid for things, and that gives us analytic geometry. So if you're, one of the things he's most famous for, if you look it up, he's like hundreds of mathematical things that he is famous for, if you're into it. But the one that I especially remember is analytic geometry, and the X and Y axis, and doing that kind of thing. And maps started being made, so if you look up, there's a map called the Fra Mira map, and I wish I could show it to you, but let me make sure of the spelling. Fra. So F-R-A-M-A-U-R-O map. And if you get a chance, look up F-R-A space M-A-U-R-O map. And this map was made in 1450 by an Italian cartographer, and it's a very famous map. It's round, it's upside down, it's kind of neat. But it's the whole world, although the ocean is just like an inch all around the land, right? And you can get an idea of why people thought of the planet as Earth. Today we might refer to this planet as ocean, with a little bit of Earth, but mostly ocean. Sorry about it. Anybody have any relatives in Florida and that area where the floods are? Because, Milton is going to hit them on Wednesday, and that's already a 5?
It was a 1, and then it just got racked up like that.
Just last night. Yeah. Scary, because, of course, there's still piles of debris all over the place, and the governor is concerned that all those piles of debris are going to blow all over the place. So that's their priority right now. Sorry about that. So the Fra Mauro map, but by the time you get to Descartes' time, then they start using the grid lines, and that, of course, gives you a much more accurate depiction of the ground. And he also, I believe, used it in order to measure hill height and things like that, because he's an engineer in an army that now has things called cannons that aren't very accurate, and they're trying to figure out how, to make them more accurate, and how you can know where the projectile is going to land. And so the arcs that these projectiles take are part of the analytic geometry and the different things that he's drawing and mathematically trying to figure out. So it's kind of interesting. The one cardinal that he talked to, and they are having their discussions, he had said that he could figure out how to put science on a firm basis. And the cardinal said, well, do it. Do it in the Netherlands, though, where you'll be safe. And, oh, by the way, why is the Netherlands safe? The reason that the Netherlands are safe is because Germany has become a Protestant country in the north, and that's because of Martin Luther. And so they're the Lutherans, right, on the north in Germany. France, on the other side of the Netherlands, is still Roman Catholic. They have fights with the Huguenots, but basically they're Catholic, right? That's the problem. And so the Netherlands, being in the middle of a Catholic country and a Protestant country, does its best to allow everybody, so they have freedom of religion, unless you're Jewish. Freedom of religion, as long as you're Christian of one sort or another, right? They still killed one another over it, right? But the 30 Years' War. In fact, that's the army he was in. Several of the battles that he was present at, even though he wasn't in danger or anything, apparently, were part of what's called the 30-Year War of religious fighting in Germany and elsewhere. In any case, he I got lost. Shoot. He went to the Netherlands where he would be safe, because they did allow Jews there, by the way, and we'll see that later when we talk about my goodness, I can't think of the philosopher's name at the moment. Benedict Spinoza. When we see him, he's Jewish, and he's in the Netherlands, born there, raised there, always stayed there. In any case, so the Jews are allowed to be there, but they don't have a whole lot of rights. They're restricted in certain ways. So we'll see. The Netherlands is still kind of they're product of their time, right? In any case, Descartes goes there, and it's kind of neat. There's a book called the what's it called when you're dead and they dissect your body? It's called the autopsy? No, there's got to be another one. And Dr. Tulip. What's another name for it? Not an autopsy. Dissection. When you're like in a class and they have a dead body in front of you and they are
Yeah,
anatomy
dissection.
anatomy lesson. Anatomy lesson? The anatomy lesson. Okay. So it's the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulip. And yes, he is the if you could see it.
Oh, I do.
There's a if you're on a device, you could look up the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulip. It's a famous Rembrandt painting of Dr. Tulip.